Okay, we're at the top of the hour. Welcome everyone to this Reload webinar, which is GroupWise Backup and Disaster Recovery. My name is Q Mangus. I'll be um, hosting this webinar for you, and of course, Tay Kratzer joins us on the line here. He'll be doing the presentation and walking you through Reload. Just a couple items to take note of before we begin. If you do have any questions, you can feel free to put those through in the question tab there in GoToMeeting, and we'll be sure to get to those as they come through, and we'll also have time at the end for that. You can also put them through in the chat, and we'll address them there as well. Also, just so everybody knows, this webinar is being recorded, so if you want to view it later or share it with colleagues, you can feel free to do that. And it will be posted on youtube.com/guavatv. And feel free to visit that site. You can view other things as well that have to do with other webinars and other videos that we've done. Also, everyone will receive an email with that link as well to the recording. So thanks everyone once again for being here and for your interest in this topic. We'll go ahead and turn the time over to Tay, and he will guide us through Reload 5.1 for GroupWise, backup and disaster recovery for GroupWise.
Thanks, Q. Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, it sounds great.
Okay, terrific. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming to this webinar, and those of you too that are going to view this on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about Reload 5.1 for GroupWise, and just the notion of Reload for GroupWise is the bigger point, and what advantages it gives to you. I've got a very short presentation just with some bullet items, and then we're going to immediately get into the Reload web interface and show you the UI, and then just show you the functionality that, I mean, that's really what you're after is what can it do for you, and how can it make your system run better. So let's go to our next slide here. So here's the key features of Reload is push button disaster recovery for post offices and domains, and we'll demonstrate that today. Simple message store, seamlessly, look at that, restore, sorry. Simple message restoration seamlessly integrated with GroupWise. We'll demonstrate that for you. Really, really simple to get stuff back. We're going to restore email, and we're going to even restore an address book, so you can kind of see probably pretty common things that you deal with when you need to restore stuff for people. It's a superior backup solution for GroupWise. We'll help to illustrate that. And then another thing about Reload that so many of our customers really enjoy is just set it and forget it. It just runs. It sends you messages every day. A message telling you the status of the entire system and all the profiles that you might have in one consolidated email. So it's very nice architecture. And then, some other notable features about Reload is it provides, the ability for tape backups, offsite backups. It's very efficient when it comes to disk space. So, for example, you can keep about 2 weeks worth of backups, 14 days worth of backups, with about 2.5 times the size of your post office needed on disk. So, let's say your post office was, let's say, 100 gigs. I know that's kind of small, but let's say it's 100 gigs. Instead of, it requiring 1.4 terabytes for 14 backups, 14 full backups. It has 14 full backups in the size of 2.5 times the post office, or 250 gigabytes. So that's very, very efficient on disk space and the bandwidth usage, because we don't have to bring the entire post office across every night. We just have to bring them across certain components, stitch it together, and we have a full backup. So, and then those backups are immediately usable. So it's not like you have to sit there and when we want to restore something, you don't have to go, oh, okay, I want this component and then this component, and let's merge these components and then we're ready to go. Now you just go in, you select the backup you want, push a button, wait a minute, and it's available for you. So really nice. The Reload architecture is you have a Reload server, and for most people that's all they have got. They just got the Reload server, but there's also the ability to put in what's called a collector for customers that have post offices on Linux. Then you can implement a collector, and there's various advantages to that for most customers. There's various advantages to that. So just give an example. We had an account in Europe that they were replicating their data, like 100 kilometers away, and when we put the collector architecture in place versus an NFS mount, they got a speed increase to their backups, tenfold speed increase. So the collector makes a lot of sense in certain scenarios, and particularly when you want to get the data offsite. So that's the architecture. You have a server, and then optionally you can have what's called a collector. But again, most people just have what's called the reload server that pulls the data over and backs it up to the reload server. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get out of that, and let me just show to you and kind of illustrate this for you. Let's show you first, let's demonstrate the notion of restoring email. Now, let me just kind of set the stage for you here. Okay, I'm showing you here my GroupWise client. Okay, my GroupWise client, I'm connected to, here we go, guava2.guava.com. Okay, so that's the DNS address for a slash server sitting in our data center, and that's the post office that I'm on. Now, my post office is being backed up on this particular server. This is the actual profile here, okay, associated with my post office. It gets backed up, you know, about 22 minutes a day, and you know, that's being backed up to this server, and we've got, you know, several backups to choose from. And they just created the server here recently, so we don't have the 14 days worth of backups, but typically, you know, if this had been running longer than that, we would have, you know, 14 backups, because that's how we've configured it. So anyways, that's the architecture. So now I'm going to just show you here. I'm inside of my GroupWise client, and let's say I wanted to, you know, restore an item. Now let's just kind of go in here and let's just jump down to, like, okay, let's take like this email here from Nico. Okay, let's say delete and empty. Now I first want to show you this. If we go to my trash, you notice my trash is at 376. Okay, and I'm going to say delete and empty. Okay, and bink, it's still at 376, which tells me that the item is truly gone. It's no longer in my mailbox. It's not in my trash. I did a delete and empty, you know, operation, and so that's just, you know, so we can demonstrate this. So now what I'm going to do is inside of the GroupWise client, I'm using the 12 client here, and I just do it for compatibility with some older stuff that I connect to. But inside of you know, any one of your, you know, GroupWise Windows clients, there's this option for backup. You know, it's also under File Open Backup. Now this is available to you if you've set up what's called a GroupWise Restore area, and the GroupWise Restore area is associated with the reload server. Okay, so it's really powerful. So here is an end user with no rights to the reload server. Now, you know, I know that I have rights to log into it from a web interface, but the reload server, there's no file system rights that I have to it. So I'm just going here to backup, and what's happening is because we've defined the restore area, the GroupWise client basically reached out to the POA and said, hey, this person just went into the backup, you know, option, and there's some backup over there that you've defined in, you know, GroupWise administration. Can you get to it? Because I certainly can't. And so the GroupWise client says that to the POA, and the POA says, oh yeah, all right, I got that. And how does the POA have access to the reload server? It has a persistent NFS client mount over to the reload server, and so the backups are available to the GroupWise server rather simply. So it's a one-time setup, and you never have to do anything again outside of select the backup that you want. So right now I can just highlight this item and do a restore. Okay, and if I go back into my mailbox, I slide back down to the 25th. Oh, I went down too far. Beep, beep, beep. Okay. Go down here to the 25th, and there we go. There's the email that I restored. So you can see how simple it was to restore. And part of the reason that I didn't even have to go to someone and say, hey, can you load this back up and so forth, because we're using on this particular profile, there's a feature in Reload called auto reload. So you see this right here, or sorry, auto restore. Connect back up to restore area, and it's enabled. So it's the idea that when I first made Reload, the customer that I worked with was a rather large customer, and they said, you know what, 75% of the time what we need is the most current backup. So why don't you just make that available automatically to us? And so I did. I architected it that way that when the backup's complete, it's just immediately available to the GroupWise restore area functionality, and so that the users can use the restore area without having to call someone and say, hey, could you load up the most current backup, and make that available and so forth. No one has to do that. Now, if you wanted to jump in the time machine and you wanted to go back to a backup, way in the past, then you can do that, and then it's immediately available to the users in about a minute's time. But because of this auto reload, again, the most current backup is automatically made available. Okay, so we've shown you how easily you can restore an email and how nicely integrated Reload is with GroupWise. A really important thing to understand is there's nothing that had to be installed to the GroupWise client. We're simply working hand in glove with the features that are built into GroupWise that enable this. And so it's like the two are made for each other. It's a beautiful solution. Okay, now let's go over a different scenario. Who runs into this? I know that a lot of times people run into a scenario where someone trashes an address book. Okay, so let's just simulate that here for a minute. I'm going to go in here, and I've got different address books, but let's go ahead and let's imagine that this address book got deleted. Okay, so I'm just going to say delete book, and I'm going to say, yep, poof. Okay, now, and then I call my GroupWise system administrator and I say, oh my goodness, I lost this address book, can you help me get it back? Okay, so how would we resolve that? Well, let me just show that to you here. So I'd say, I'd talk to the user and say, yeah, I just lost it today. I'd go, oh, okay, all right, well, gee, I've got a backup from yesterday. Let's go ahead and just load that up. And so literally it's that simple. All I have to do is go in, if it's the most current backup, I just press that button at the very home page, and it says, oh, okay, here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to load a POA up at this IP address and this port, and you go ahead and you can connect to that. Okay, so, and there you can see here it's saying that the backup Wednesday, January 25th is loaded. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my GroupWise client, okay, and I want to just bring this over here so you can see this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just fill in my password here, okay, and I'm going to type in the IP address, right, that it indicated, and so that's just an IP address that's bound to the reload server, okay, and I've got to put in the appropriate port, okay, and get a little prompt, Anyways, and now here's what I've done, okay, I'm now logged into the, you can see this here, I'm logged into, you see that IP address right there, right, 202, right? I'm now logged into that reload server connected to that backup from yesterday, okay? And then if I go to the address book, we're looking again for that Montreal office address book. See that there? Okay, now in my live mailbox, of course, that got trashed and deleted, right? And so I need to take and restore this to my live mailbox. So this is going to be really simple. So here's what I'll do is I'm going to say File, Export, okay, and I'm going to say Entire Address Book, right? And you can see I was fiddling with this yesterday, so I'll delete that. Okay, so I'm going to say montrealoffice.nav, okay? Oh, that's what it was. But I'll just say, Montreal, so you can see this kind of all the way through. There we go. So I've exported that address book. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of my GroupWise client, okay, and I'm going to go back into my production mailbox. Okay, so that's guava2.guava.com. Okay, there we go. So now we're back in my live account right here, right? guava2.guava.com. Now we go into the address book, and of course that Montreal address book, poof, it's gone, right? So now what I'll do is I'll do new book, and I'll just say Montreal office, okay, all right. And then I'm going to do a file, and an import, right? And see that there's that nav file that I just created from the backup, okay, that I exported from the app backup. And so now I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, put it into this one called Montreal office, say close, and bada bing, I got the address book back. Okay, so so what we demonstrated here was that there's two ways to access the data on the reload server. Okay, you can do it through the file open backup feature that's called a restore area. Okay, or you can just fire up a POA against the data, and which is as simple as, you know, clicking this button, or, you know, going here and saying, yeah, you know what, I want to oops, I hit the wrong thing. Yeah, I want to go in and, you know, select this backup, you know, from this particular day or whatever, right? And so, anyways, you can access the data in two different manners. You know, restoring email, the file open backup features, you know, the easiest. Restoring address book items, obviously the file open backup feature just doesn't do that for you. You have to connect to it in the manner in which I demonstrated for you. And so there's, again, two ways to get at that data. Okay, so very, very powerful. Anything you can imagine that you would want to do with a backup, you can see it's just, you know, a minute away from you to be able to access. Okay, now let's talk about the next thing that I want to demonstrate for you, and that's push button disaster recovery. So, you know, let's say that you know, you lost your server, something went really bad on your live server, and gee, what do? Well, this is all you do. See the little ambulance button here? You click on the ambulance button, and that kicks into place all of these things. And so really what it does is it just goes and identifies the most recent backup. It loads a POA, a fully functional POA, that's ready to talk MTP and, you know, everything else that you'd want it to do for that post office, that most recent backup, and you're up and running. Okay, now let me just show you this here. We're in disaster recovery mode. It still hasn't loaded the POA. It takes it about a minute for it to do that programmatically, and so it's actually doing that right now. Kind of a way to troubleshoot it is to look at the agent log and make sure it came up, and yep, there we go. You can see it. Wednesday, January 25th is loaded. Now, all that would need to happen is again, we aren't truly in a disaster, so you see here I'm not connected to that POA, okay? But all that the administrator would need to do is flip the A record for guava2.guava.com to, you know, the IP address that it's currently pointed at, to the IP address that's bound on the reload server that this POA is listening to, okay? And then bink, my users would be up and running, you know, and if you're using DNS, you know, web access, you know, your SOAP, everything else would just be seamless. And the only thing that would be noticeable to users is, you know, when did the last backup go on, and obviously any items between the last backup and now wouldn't be in there, and so that would be the only thing missing. Now, that said, you can easily go into reload, and instead of doing a backup once a day, you could do multiple backups in a day. So, for example, here under backup job settings, you can say, hey, let's do a backup, you know, say like at 4 and one at 12, and then let's do one at, you know, 8, you know, and that way your you know, latest backup is no more than 8 hours old. You know, your choice as to how you architect it, but we have lots and lots of people doing that where they're doing multiple backups in a day. Technically, you could do a backup every hour. It just depends on, you know, what you want to do and how you want your system utilized. There's ways to architect that, and I've actually known a customer or two who's done that they're doing backups every hour. So anyways, now we've demonstrated push button disaster recovery, and you have push button disaster recovery for MTAs too, which isn't as exciting, but it's certainly nice to be able to have that. Okay, so we've demonstrated, you know, two of the major features behind reload, and I'm just going to look at my notes here for a minute and talk about, you know, every time that you use reload to do a restore of an email, really the data is exactly the same as though you had pushed the ambulance button. So what's really nice is very often organizations will have a disaster recovery routine that they're supposed to run, maybe every 6 months or 3 months or every year, something like that. And it's a big event, and it's kind of stressful, and there's all these things they have to go through. Well, what's really neat is when you're using Reload to restore email regularly, you're really using exactly the same mechanisms, just a slightly different door into the data, but exactly the same data that you would have in a disaster recovery scenario. So every time you're using Reload, you're testing your disaster recovery scenario. So that's pretty good. Okay, I'm just looking at my time here. Okay, so let's talk about some other things that you may want to consider. Okay, here's a get-up I want to show you. Oh, no, wrong one. Okay, that one. Okay. So I want to kind of open your eyes to something here, and sometimes I have customers who already have Reload on the line, and so I'm particularly happy to have them kind of get this notion. Right here on this particular server, we've got a post office that's in Montreal, Canada, okay, called Beg2PO. And it's being backed up, okay, and this server, reload2.guava.com, is actually sitting in Montreal, Canada, okay, and it does a backup of this post office. Now, then what it does is it uses what's called a collector, which pulls the data from the data sitting on the Reload server. It takes the most current backup from the Beg2PO profile and pushes it to another Reload server, and that Reload server is sitting here in our data center, our cloud data center in Provo. And so not only are we getting a local backup, and that's available to the end users, for the file open backup feature and so forth, but it's also being replicated out to Provo to another location. So it doesn't have to be to our cloud. We're just obviously interested in people looking at that. You could easily set up a sister site and be replicating to another location. And what's slick too is you don't have to keep around 14 days worth of backups. The reason you replicate offsite is typically because you want to have that available for disaster recovery, because when you think about it, if you had some kind of a site disaster, let's say there was like, I'll give you an example. Several years ago at a state capitol building, the governor's office had just moved back into this state capitol building after they'd spent about $100 million earthquake proofing it, and so anyways, they moved the equipment back in, and then there were some problems after the renovation with the HVAC system. And when the worker came in and worked on the HVAC system, they touched off the sprinkler system, and everything got wet. All the servers got wet and so forth. And the fortunate thing in this particular customer's environment was, at the time, their Reload server was actually on a workstation, and it was sitting under someone's desk instead of being in the server room. But if it had been in the server room, they would have been in a world of hurt. And so, site disasters happen. It's really, really a good idea to consider the notion of getting, your most current backup offsite, or you can even have more backups offsite, but at least that most current backup being replicated offsite. And so that's just something that I wanted to be able to envision and consider. Also, for those of you who already have Reload, just you're seeing here the ability to create custom buttons. That's under Configure, Web Administration, and System Preferences, and you can enable custom buttons and indicate what URL they're associated with and so forth. So if you download the latest version of Reload, this version here, you will have that ability. That's a new feature that wasn't available to people before. Okay, so let's keep talking about some other things that might be of interest to you. Okay, let's talk about tape backups here for a minute. You have the ability to go in and design. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong server. Let's go to this server. Here we go. let's go to this one, and let's go to this profile, and let's go to configure, and let's go to tape backups. There we go. All right. So you have the ability to create a tape backup of your data that's sitting on the reload server for a particular post office. And so what's neat is it'll create you a tar file, okay, one file. Now you can actually design it to split it up over multiple files, but we won't talk about that today. But you can have it present a tar file to be backed up to tape. And in fact, you can even have it run a custom command. Here we go. Here's our post-tar command right here. And so this is a script that I created that basically FTPs it to a Windows box that happens to have the tape drive hanging off of it, and puts it in a place where it gets backed up to that tape. So very powerful feature. So, you know, although we're pretty modern, very modern, you know, hot backup and so forth, we still work with, you know, these traditional backup solutions, which I never want to cast stones at, because I still think that tape backup is very viable, and particularly when you need to be able to go back years in the past, it's obviously the most viable solution, you know, for truly getting stuff in its native format. Now, if you don't need it in its native format, you may want to consider our product Retain. So, okay, so tape backups, and another thing that I want to show you here, it's just kind of a interesting feature that really has nothing to do with backups, but everything to do with GroupWise. We haven't enabled it on this particular system, but you know, there's a little challenge in GroupWise where if a user's mailbox gets rebuilt, the users, when they go to do a find on inside of their mailbox, they may not find all of those items for a while, maybe for several days, until the Quick Finder indexing has re-indexed their entire mailbox. By default, GroupWise will only index 2,000 items at a time, and I dealt with this for a few years there. I administered a system with about 600 users, and I thought, you know, you know, what would happen is the help desk would call. They'd say, hey, you know what, someone can't find items. I'd go, oh yeah, their mailbox has been rebuilt. Let me go rebuild the indexes, and then everything's going to be good. Well, and so I'd go to the POA HTTP console, type in their FID, you know, jiggle a couple things, and then run it. The problem was that the user had that experience in which they couldn't find an item, and usually it'd go to the, you know, the user would complain of it, it'd go to the help desk, then it'd finally get up to me, and I don't know, we're 2 or 3 days into it, and the user had a really bad experience. And I thought, gee, wouldn't it be nice if I could proactively resolve this problem? And so what I did was I was the developer of Reload, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to make a little module inside of Reload that'll just take care of that for me. And so it's called the Quick Finder Resolution Agent. It determines when this scenario is, you know, this condition has occurred, and it resolves it for you, and it even sends you a little email and says, hey, you know what, I ran the Quick Finder index when I did a backup for this particular user. Now, it can be a little bit resource intensive, and so you can indicate an exclusion window, and if a backup goes on during the exclusion window and it discovers the condition, what it'll do is it'll send you an email and say, hey, you told me not to run it, so I'm just letting you know, and when you're ready to run it, just click here, and it literally emails you a little link that you just click on, and boom, that creates a request to the POA to rebuild the user's indexes. So again, nothing really to do with backups, but it's like, well, gee, while we're here, we can discover this condition and resolve it for you. Okay, so some other notable features here is, you know, okay, here we go. Freezing a backup. So, you know, you typically define, you know, how many days you want, you know, backups to be kept around, maybe for 14 days or whatever it is. And but what if you faced a scenario in which someone just came back from vacation, they've been on vacation for a while, and they're like, oh shoot, I lost these items, and you go, oh wow, you know what? It's probably back in that backup from June 8th because you went on vacation on January 8th because you went on vacation January 9th. Gee, that's about to roll off. It'd be nice if I could freeze that backup. And so you can just highlight the backup and then say freeze, and that item, that backup will be frozen, meaning that it doesn't roll off, okay? And so if I just go here, you'll see how it's got an underscore F next to it, okay? So that backup's been frozen. It won't roll off. It won't penalize the backups that you've indicated that you want to keep. And so ultimately, once you have that frozen, you'll be keeping 15 backups. You don't have to tweak this in any manner. You'll be keeping 15 backups until you unfreeze that backup, and then poof, it'll go away with the next backup cycle. Or you could go in and you could delete a backup. You could highlight the backup and say, I want to delete this backup. Now it'd have to be unfrozen. If it's frozen, you can't delete the backup. But anyways, that's a super powerful feature, and really important for the real world when you can't get to something right away. Okay. A couple other notable features I just want to make you aware of. I mentioned it, but you get a daily status report. That's really nice. It truly is set it and forget it. I mean, you're going to, if when you think about it, if your users can restore most of their items by themselves, they never really have to talk to you about, restoring items. And as long as you don't have a disaster, you're not going to go to your reload server very often. And as much as it's fun to be here and play around, there's not a whole lot of reason to be using it. You've got probably, your average customer has, 30 or 40 other systems. When I say systems, GroupWise is a system, and you've got your email, and you got your ticket system, and you got them, all these other systems. You don't want to have to sit there and babysit this system, and that's something that's really, really nice about Reload, is it sends you this consolidated email every day, and literally just the status of the message will be very consistent and says to you, how things are. And in fact, you could create a rule that just says, hey, you know what, if it says this, then just file it away, and if it says this, then don't file it away so it's in my face. And it's a super powerful, again, simple but very powerful in its impact in your day, so that you can do other more important things than having to babysit one more system. And there was another thing that I wanted you to be aware of is this notion of, if you have a disaster. Okay, let's say you had a disaster. I went through this about a month and a half ago, something like that, where Novell actually up at Micro Focus, the Novell building, they lost a post office, and it was kind of interesting because it was the same post office that the product manager for GroupWise was on. Mike Bills is his name, and anyways, their person there called me in a panic. Hey, we got this problem, and I know that there's some disaster recovery thing. What do we do? And I showed them. I said, well, you push the button, but it actually wasn't as simple as that, because they didn't have a DNS name for their post office, so we had to go into GroupWise administration and twiddle some stuff, and then they didn't have some certificates in place. But anyways, outside of that, we were up and going in short order over on the Reload server, and the Reload server hosted their post office for a day, and then what happened was they were able to bring back their server. And so we hadn't completely lost the server, so that was good. That was, saved them a bunch of time. Now we had a scenario where we had data that was on the Reload server that was obviously newer, but we also had some data that was back on their GroupWise mailbox, their GroupWise servers, that was between when the backup went on and when they cut over to Reload. Well, because they had GroupWise 2014, we just used a simple script that we ship with that allows you to merge two versions of a GroupWise mailbox. And so we just merged the data, and then we migrated the data over to their GroupWise post office location. And in fact, I want to show you here, okay, sorry, that's kind of messy. I want to show you here the migration functionality inside of Reload. So the migration tool, because it's not used often, and it's kind of easier to have people see a log that's kind of real-time, we've built it inside of the text interface, so the text administration interface of Reload. So if we go into, disaster recovery, okay, we go to a post office and we say, hey, I want to migrate this post office. You first do what's called a pre-migration, okay, and that could take, depending on, if it's a brand new server, it could take maybe a couple days to replicate the stuff. If it's a revived server, then it won't take too long to do that pre-migration. And so you say, yeah, start the pre-migration, and then it tells you, hey, unload the current production post office if it's running. Now in a disaster recovery scenario, it's not. And do a backup and then do a final migration. Now when you're in disaster recovery mode, it actually presents you with different options, but I won't fire that up, but I'll just kind of explain this to you here. You could kick off this final full migration without doing the unloading stuff and so forth. You can do that final migration and then load up POA against that data and just make sure everything looks the way you want it before you actually bring down the system and do that final migration. So in this scenario with the with Novell, okay, what we did was we did that. We did that final migration, and that way we knew how long the downtime would be. And if I remember correctly, the downtime was like going to be less than 10 minutes. And so that way we could let the users know, hey, guess what, there's going to be a downtime. We've already pre-migrated the data. This is a bunch of GroupWise engineers, so they understood this. We've already pre-migrated the data, and we're going to do this final migration. It's going to take us 10 minutes, so just be aware that there will be a downtime window during this time. And then bada bing, we ran it, and it ran for a little bit, and we were up and running. So what's really neat is that this migration can go on while you're still hosting the post office in disaster recovery mode on your live server. And all the other backups are going on. So the fact that you have a disaster recovery event and you're up and running with a particular post office on the Reload server, everything else works just as normal. And you can even be migrating that same post office that you're currently using. You can be doing a pre-migration, without any troubles. In fact, you can even do the full migration, again, to test it, to make sure you can get into the data, even while the data is all up and running over on the Reload server. So super, super powerful feature. We migrate the data much faster than Novell's tools, their traditional tools, because we take a very, very different approach to how we migrate the data. So that's a super powerful feature post-disaster recovery. Okay, I think I have covered just about everything that I want to about Reload. I'm going to see if there's any questions, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about Blueprint, which is a piece that, nope, I don't see any questions. Okay, Blueprint is a piece that's like an add-on to Reload. Let me take you back over to my production post office. Okay, so we're now transitioning to a product called Blueprint for Reload. Now this is an extra purchase. It's not nearly the cost of Reload or Retain. It's just a little bolt-on to Reload, and a lot of people find it very, very helpful. So here's what Blueprint is for you: it's the ability for you to have reports about the GroupWise message store that give you a really good microscopic view, quite frankly, into the user's mailboxes, and also gives you a overall sense of what's going on at a post office, at a message store level, and so forth. There was no other solution like this at the time that I made Blueprint. I had a customer who well, it's the same customer that had 600 users. I was like their third line support or second line support. Anyways, I provided support for them, and they were going to be implementing an archive solution and wanted to understand the impact that it would have on their archiving solution, how much space they needed, and so forth. They had a bunch of business decisions pretty much to make, and didn't have any way to really quantify what was going on at a user level and a post office level with their mail. And like if they implemented a 90-day and newer policy is kept inside of GroupWise, and then 90 days and older is put into the archive solution, what would be the impact of that? Okay. And so, in addition to all these settings, these are tweakable. You don't have to have a 90-day report, but that's how I've designed this particular one. So anyways, the blueprint, the reason it's called Blueprint for Reload is here's the idea. We need to do this analysis of each of the mailboxes and then total all of that analysis. But rather than sitting there and tickling and tormenting your GroupWise, your live GroupWise system, we go, yeah, you know what? We got data that we've got here that we recently backed up. It's just as well. Why don't we do analysis on that data and present this report off of that data versus the the live system? So again, reducing the impact on the live system is what is a major feature about this. But also, I want you to show you this report here. So this is just one of the reports, and I'll show you some of the others. But what's really powerful about this is this report right here. This is one report right here. Okay, this is a cumulative report of the entire post office. Now this is a small post office, so but you can see here, look at that, data being used by inactive mailboxes. Okay, and what's 90 days and older, 90 days and newer, and how much space is being used by all these mailboxes. Look at this, inactive mailboxes. Okay, so you notice that 6 inactive mailboxes, 6 action items. So I pop down to the bottom of that report. It's really easy to navigate this report, and it shows me all of these users and what their status is. So I can just click on a particular user there, and I can go, oh, okay, all right, that's interesting. Now another thing I can do is I can easily navigate to a user and I go, oh yeah, look at that. Gee, you know what? We're really trying to encourage people to, use less disk space or whatever it be, and we want people to be around a gig. Now I know that's obviously too small, but for your typical system. But let's just say that was my policy. Gee, I need to tell that person about that. Well, you can just click on this, and bink, pulls up an email, fills in their address, and then you can type in some stuff. Here's your report down below. Just wanted to tell you that we'd like you to get back into compliance. Your mailbox is too big or something like that. So very powerful reporting feature. So again, this is really 3 reports in one. It's got this part of the report. Okay, you've got your individuals, the individual reports, and then you have the action item report. So very powerful. Now I'm going to take you to another report. Right here, this is called a CSV report. Now, we can actually download this, and I'll show you that here in a moment, to our favorite spreadsheet application. Now, mine is Excel, but I don't have Excel on this box, and so I've got OpenOffice, and I'll show you something powerful in that. But I just want to quickly show you here, there's like over 40 data points about each one of these mailboxes that's inside of this report. So it's quite a bit more information than that other report, okay, that I showed you here. So shows the user, department, da da da. But here's some really useful stuff. For example, like active mailboxes versus inactive. What version of client? Let's say you came up with a policy, the help desk doesn't want to be, answering questions on, GroupWise 8 and GroupWise 2012 clients. Gee, there's some people that aren't on 2014. Let's address concerns and see if we can't resolve that and help them to get it installed so that the help desk, has a consistent client that they're, giving support on. And so you could easily identify those users in this report and proactively reach out to the users. Okay, there's I'll give you another example. In fact, this is better illustrated if we do this inside of a a 32-bit piece of software. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to download this CSV file. Okay, I'm going to show this in the folder. Now I'm going to take this file and I'm going to open it with my spreadsheet application, okay? And so I've got to say here, yeah, this is it's comma separated, you know, and that's sufficient. And I'm going to say, okay, and bink, that pulls into I'm sorry. I was assuming you could see my other screen. I apologize. Okay. So anyways, I went into my spreadsheet application and I pulled up this into my OpenOffice calculator utility. And now what I'm going to do is let's say I want to identify the top 5 mailboxes, okay, inside of the system. So you notice here, something that's really cool about the architecture of Blueprint is here we've got like you and me as humans, okay, and here we have something that's helpful for a spreadsheet application. That's specifically why I designed it here. So now I'm going to say data, and I'm going to say sort, okay, extend solution, extend, sorry, and I'm going to say I want to see mailbox size sortable descending order, okay? And now what we've identified here, okay, inside of this report, now look at this. It's now, because this field is sortable, or I'm sorry, this row is column, sorry, this column is sortable, I was able to easily identify and roll up to the top who's got the 5 largest mailboxes. So I've got Josh through Dave that have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, Dave Nuttall that have the largest mailboxes, and so I could then proactively reach out to those people. Hey, we've got this policy. We're going to try and get you down to less disk space, and we're going to be implementing this solution retain, and don't worry about it. You'll still be able to have your mail, but we don't want to keep stuff around from 10 years ago. And so anyways, very, very powerful functionality when you think about it. Because we have the ability to import into a CSV, there's all of these fields that you can easily sort and find out information that would be rather difficult to get in a timely manner in any other way. Okay, so I'm going to close that out. So another really cool thing is with your Blueprint reports is you have the ability to have users get a automated report. So let me just show this to you here. So personal mailbox reports, okay, and there's even a thing called threshold highlighting. I'm going to show that to you here. Now look at this. This is a report that is not a good example of a individual. Okay, this is personal mailbox reports. Here we go. That's what we wanted. I apologize. So this is a report that that the end user got that said, hey, here's what we're trying to tell you. This is a GroupWise mailbox report, so they don't get all this, this is WABA Blueprint, for reload and so forth. I don't bother with that. They don't really need to know how it got generated, but they get this report that says, hey, here's the information about your mailbox, and you even have the ability to create what's called custom content. So you see this custom message field, okay? It's just a file, and it's going to throw it into that custom content area, which is at the very top. And so, gee, can you imagine that? Every user can get a mailbox report. And in fact, you can even do what's called inclusion lists or exclusion lists. So here's the idea. If you just wanted just a batch of people, to get the message, let's say like your top 5 offenders or something like that, then you can just go and say, hey, just use an inclusion list, and just these users get the email to indicate, the message we're trying to get across to them, or just these 50 users, whatever you identify. And so it's a very powerful feature. And then again, there's what's called threshold highlighting, which is that nifty stuff that I showed you. See how it's got these colors here, okay? That's done through what's called threshold highlighting. So very powerful feature. Recommend that you give Blueprint a look, integrates very nicely with Reload, relieves your live system of the impact of this powerful reporting mechanism, just feeding off a Reload versus your live system. Okay, well, I think I've covered about everything that I'm planning on covering. Q, are there any questions that you see having come through?
There was one that came through. It was just, my question was, why does it need so much disk space? Like 2.5 times the size of our post office. They said they saw that on
Okay.
the website.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, good question. So let me just talk about GroupWise architecture for a moment, and then I'm going to just kind of show you here. Remember that there's this profile here on this server. Let's see, let's close this stuff down. Not that one. Oh, I can't remember which server, which one did we do? Okay, here we go. Remember we have this profile called beg2po? Okay, I'm going to show you that profile on disk. Okay, so here we go. All right, so this is kind of what is down, under the engine, under the hood. Okay, if we go to this backups week now directory, okay, we have here these 14 backups. Okay, and then you even see that frozen one that we froze before, right? See that _F. All right. So, anyways, this is where all these backups are kept. Now, what's kept inside of each one of these? Okay, so let's just go to Wednesday, January 25th. Okay, they all look exactly the same. So here's how it's architected. You see the OF user, let's see, DUHS /OF user and /OFMSG. There we go. All right. So so what's required, and this is an extremely small post office, so there's not much data there, but anyways, what's required is the content of OF user and OFMSG, and then of course a little bit of stuff, if you've got libraries and so forth, you've got to take that into account. But what's inside of the OF user, OFMSG, GWDMS, that's really what you're backing up, plus the OF files. Okay, so if you think of your average GroupWise post office, about 10% of the data is in OF user and OFMSG, and 90% is in OF files. Now, what's really cool is Reload takes and munges all of those OF files, directories for each one of the backup sets for a particular day, so it's a shared OF files bucket in a sense, okay, because in GroupWise, the only thing that ever changes is the database is constantly changed. OF files never changes. The only thing that changes about OF files is things are added and things are deleted, but blobs don't ever change. So once a blob is replicated, it can just be shared with all the other backups for a particular post office. And so so if we go here, there's a directory called Blobs. Okay, sorry, I got to go back one more. Sorry, see Blobs. There we go. OF files. Okay, and then you see your your OF files directory that you typically get, right? FDF, FDF, just to show you the blobs here, right? And those are the blobs. Blobs are anything that's over 2K inside of GroupWise, attachments or even message bodies or even 2 lines. Anything that's over 2K becomes what's called a external blob. Okay, and so so what Reload is doing is it stores the OF user and OFMSG directory, and it stores any blobs, new blobs that are added each day in this shared blobs bucket. And so what the 2.5 represents is if you think about 10% of your post office has to be replicated, okay, every day in size, okay. So let's say your post office, just to make it easy, is 100 gigs. You got to keep around for, let's say we're doing 14 days, you'd have to keep around 140 gig, okay, for the databases. And then you got the blobs. Remember, the blobs is 90% of the size of the post office, so you take 140 okay, gigs, plus 90 gigs. Again, this is a 100 gig post office, so 90% is in OF files. So now we've added 140 gigs, and then we add 90 gigs, that's 230 gigs. And so 2.5 times the size of the post office is 250 gigs. And you might go, oh, it's really 2.3. Well, yes, no. The reason that you need a little bit more disk space is you have to make up for the fact that we don't immediately get rid of a blob when it gets deleted off of your live system. We have to wait till all the backups roll off for that particular day, and then we get rid of the blobs that are no longer associated, because although blobs never change, they are added and deleted. And so reload, one of the really nifty things about reload is it does delete blobs eventually from the reload server that are no longer used on the live system. And for those of you that are, there's kind of some DB copy cowboys out there that try and pull off some of what reload does, that would be a very difficult thing for them to be able to do. And that's one of the things that reload does, is it does get rid of these blobs that are no longer required. But you need to allow a little bit of disk space until such time that the blob is no longer needed. And so that's what accounts for the 2.5 times the size of the post office. So great question. I hope I explained it well enough. And go back and listen to the video. Yeah, go ahead.
And then there is a question, kind of a follow-up on that. Is there a way to do incremental backups, or is it a full backup every time?
Every reload backup is an incremental, but it's a full. So I know that sounds funny. I sound like a politician. So it's an incremental in the sense that all you're doing is you're getting the databases, okay? You're getting a complete copy of the databases, but you're not getting the OF files all over again every time, okay? Again, remember, that's 90% of your data is in OF files. All we're ever having to back up is the new blobs that get added to OF files, okay? And so although every reload backup really is an incremental, because of the shared blobs, linking and so forth that goes on, it's as though it's a full backup. So it's an incremental that acts like a full, in the sense that the data is fully available, to immediately get after.
Perfect. And then a couple others. Is reload running on the same server as GroupWise, or is it its own server?
Okay, good question. So reload is a completely separate server, okay, from your reload server. Now, technically, just reload will do all kinds of things, and you could run it right on your live server, but that wouldn't be ideal. You'd want the data to be over on another location, and even another site if you can would be really nice. But there is a key part of that question to point out, is that you do have the ability to put what's called a collector on your live production post office and have the collector push the data over to your reload server. We've got several customers doing that. There's not a requirement for that, but we've got several customers doing that because in their environment it's beneficial that they do so, particularly if your reload server might be at an offsite location. So they're like, hey, yeah, we want to use reload, but we don't want to allocate an on-site server and an off-site server, but we do see the value of having an off-site server, so we'd like to just have the data pushed over to this offsite location, and you can use the reload collector to do that. And when you use the reload collector versus the whole pull the data model, which again works great inside of a LAN environment, but inside of a WAN environment, when you do the push method, it can use quite a bit less bandwidth. And uses a little bit of disk space on your reload server, just a titch, about 2 times the size of the OF user and OF MSG. In fact, what's really cool is when you go into the reload web interface, if you go to post office in POA settings, it says, hey, if you've got a collector, this is how much disk space is going to be used on this particular post office if you were to implement a collector. Okay, this is how much space that reload would need in order to DB copy the databases locally and then replicate those up. It doesn't DB copy the blobs, it replicates those those directly from where they're at, but the database it has to DB copy them, and then it uses kind of like an rsync technology to send the data over to the reload server. So good question.
Thanks, Tay, for the information, and thanks everyone for being here. Once again, this was recorded, so look for that recording, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks again.
Thank you.